Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amor de Soi Wellness. And Donovan Jensen is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. Today, I'm really excited to introduce our guest today, Courtland McPherson. He is a licensed clinical social worker specializing in helping men and others get unstuck in work, relationships, and life. And today we're going to have a conversation about money. Yes. So please welcome Courtland. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Alice and Donovan. I'm happy to be here to chat with you both today.
Yes. Wonderful. So tell us a little about your story and how you decided to become a social worker.
Yeah. So I'll back it up a little bit, right? So the reason I went into social work was, I realized there was a need to help people, right? And I also, what we're going to talk probably a little bit about today is my money story. So before I had gotten into social work, I had worked in the real estate industry. And, I had got into that after a slew of other jobs. And I really thought that, real estate was the catalyst to gaining some wealth. Mm. And what I realized was it just didn't fit with me. People, this is not everybody, I'm generalizing things, but, people were driving around in flashy sort of cars. And here I was, in my mid-20s, driving a pickup truck, realizing that that's just not who I am. I don't like to wear suits and ties. And I realized that I loved helping people with different aspects of their home search, right? And so I'm old, I feel old anyway. I was around when the market started to crash, the 2008 sort of real estate crash and things. And what I started to learn was that I was better at helping people sort of navigate the losses of their homes. And then I started to realize, well, wait a second, there's an emotional piece here. And so in 2009, I said, this career is not for me anymore. And I went back to school to get my social work degree. And part of that was I wanted to learn, how to be a clinician, because I really felt like talking with people and understanding their story and supporting them through the challenging times that they had was really important. But I also understood that I wanted to think about policy and how all the things that we sort of have going in the world impact other people. And, I've been a social worker now for it's almost over 10 years, I think now. And I've been doing this work ever since.
Wow. What an inspiring story. And it's interesting how people find their paths into, into social work or whatever path that might be. Mm.
Yeah, there's probably some more details in there that I've left out, but
Yeah. So what are your thoughts about like this conversation about money and the limitations people have about that?
Yeah, I think that money impacts all of us, right? It's around us all the time. Before I got on here with you, I just saw that the stock market plummeted 600 points because of an ending of stimulus talks right now.
Oh.
And I think people see those things and it causes unsettling feelings, some fear, and we all have some narrative around, money. And that starts when we're young. It begins when we're kids. It starts with our parents, the families that we've been raised in, the communities that we're raised in, the educational experiences that we have, say, in high school and things like that. So money is all around us. And I think that it's an uncomfortable conversation for people, and we don't talk enough about it.
What kind of conversations do you think we should be having around it?
Open ones.
Open ones. Well, yes.
Yeah, what I think we should be doing is, I think money has different sort of connotations for people, right? If we don't have it, we can feel shame, we can feel sadness. It impacts all different aspects of our lives. If we do have it, we don't talk about how we got it, right? We tend to sort of just believe that somebody ended up in that place without sort of understanding maybe what the work went into it. I also recognize that people, who struggle with money aren't sure how to even elevate themselves to get in a place where they have a little bit more money, right? We don't teach the basics of economics in high school anymore, We have electronic cash registers that do it all for us. We don't understand even some of that stuff. As you asked me that, what came to mind, even we don't even understand sometimes how to read our own bank statements, and what the banks do. I looked at my bank statement today for my business, and I realized that in one of my savings accounts that there's a limit on the deposits. And if I go over that 10 deposit limit, it's 20 cents. But in the world around us, 20 cents, when there's millions of people for a large bank, that makes them a lot of money. But that 20 cents can mean something very real for people who might not see it, or they might lose that money, so that's important.
Yeah.
So I had a question around, you kind of said, like, I think you mentioned as part of your journey, you kind of transformed the way like that you've looked at money over time. And I'd be curious, like, what are some of those points, maybe like where you started and how some of those ideas started to change?
Yeah. So I'll back up, I guess, to sort of my story, right? My money story. So I grew up in poverty. And when I say poverty, we wondered most of the time where food was going to come from. I spent a lot of time. So I'm actually from the East Coast. I'm from New England. And we spent a lot of time in the winter without electricity. I'm fantastic at understanding how to bundle up when it's freezing outside and you need to wrap yourself up in a million different things. And so my money stories really started with my parents. My mom was a single mom. My dad was around, but, there wasn't a good financial picture from him where he was supporting that. So my mom really did it on her own. And I learned from an early age that money was scarce, right? So there's this scarcity mentality that sort of stuck with us. Yeah, I think in one year, I forget what year it was off the top of my head, but early 90s, my mom made like $10,000 that year, right? And she always had multiple odd jobs and things like that. So I understood work ethic, but I couldn't figure out why we didn't have electricity, why it was cold, why we didn't have enough food. And, things that emerged from that, as I've gotten older, is I can see that struggle, right? So when you get to look back on that, that's some of those transformative points. What happens with that story is I always believed that I was going to have to stay sort of working multiple jobs and basically poor. And that's not to put down anybody who struggles or anything like that. It's just a recognition of my own sort of story. And then as I've sort of moved through that stuff, it was like, well, I need to work 5 jobs to pay the bills. And even then, those 5 jobs, it's like, oh, well, I'm not actually putting money in the bank, right? So then what does that look like? So you talk about transformation points. It was like a point of like, there's a realization here that I'm not even sure what I'm doing with my money. And then how do you fix that?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in that story that actually kind of mirrors what I went through. I won't derail too much, but I remember thinking like, okay, you have to make 6 figures to be able to do anything. You have to. And I remember graduating college and getting some job at like $11, $12 an hour, and then being able to pay all my bills and being like, wait a minute, what is going on? Like everything is broken. Anyway, I just wanted to share, but also like, I do think that some of these stories or some of the examples you see when you're younger highly inform what you expect out of the world and how you expect the world to be structured.
Yeah, I was listening to a comedian, and I think it was Dave Chappelle, and I could be totally wrong on this, but basically he said there was this idea, right? There was broke and then there was poor. And his dad basically was like, well, we're not poor, we're just broke. And set the stage for this difference of what is being poor and then what is being broke. And, when we start to think about our money narrative, well, how much is enough, right? Donovan, what you're saying is like, I have to make X amount of dollars to feel successful. But where does that even come from, right? How much is enough, or how much is too much, or what's the excess of that? And then we get to sort of figure that out along the way, and then think about really what works for us and what doesn't. And then how do we also let go of some of those old storylines, right? In my case, I'm always going to be poor and or broke. And then that even follows me in social work, right? Social workers inherently are told, you have to do this job. You're not going to make a lot of money. It doesn't pay a lot. You have to see people at reduced rates because, well, they're struggling and you shouldn't be making that money off other people. And I think those storylines push us in a not so good direction. You know, it's not that they're necessarily wrong. It just means that, well, maybe we have to rethink that.
Yeah, definitely. I had to do a lot of personal development work to unravel some of my own money stories, because I have two immigrant parents who got off the boat in the late 70s, 80s. And they had nothing. They had like nothing. They worked as like dishwashers in restaurants. And then eventually, you know, they saved up to get a little bit of a education, and then worked as like electronic technicians at Hewlett Packard. And eventually they were very conservative. And so I do value my parents to be like, we never went out for food. That was like unheard of, to go out to a restaurant, an unheard of thing when we were growing up. And yeah, I kind of lived in the scarcity mindset that there's never enough money. And then the other story that I developed, because my sister would occasionally borrow money from my parents, but then they would get upset at her and how she was spending it. And so I just kind of decided at a young age, it's like, I'm not going to borrow money from my parents, because, you know, they're going to use that against me. So I would avoid, and I just was like not transparent with my student debt and all of that. And it you know, I could have used some help. So instead of, you know, taking some assistance and racking up insane interest rates with my student debt, I could have had a little more help than I did. But I was like, oh, well, I could just take out some more student loans and that'll cover it. And I wasn't money conscious. I was usually either I don't have enough money, or I'm going to dig my head in the sand about money and not deal with it, not the like proactive awareness. And it's taken a lot to shift that for myself. But I feel like I'm moving in the right direction, but I definitely notice when those conversations in my head kind of hold me back.
Well, I like what you said about money conscious, right? Because I think when we hide from things, just like in psychotherapy, right? We have to uncover stuff that is either sitting in the recesses of our mind, and we have to bring the unconscious to the consciousness. That opens the door for us to do something different with it, right? We get to explore it, understand it, and then transform it. I'm not shy, right? You talked about your student loan debt. My student loans actually are coming due this next month, right? And we don't talk about numbers, right? I have $200,000 in student loan debt. I had been avoiding that, right? Because it was a terrifying thing to go, oh my gosh, I'm going to be broke or poor the rest of my life.
Right.
And I'm giving you a hard number here because I think it's important.
Yeah.
What I did was I started to break that down and look at it and go, wait a second, this is actually manageable. And I get that, you know, I'm in a different position. I'm a white male. I have an education, and there's privilege that comes with different parts of that. Doesn't make the money easier per se, but what it does is I can recognize it, and then I get to talk about it, and then we can also break those things down with the understanding that it doesn't have to be scary. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm still a little terrified of it.
Me too.
You know, we are in a challenging economic time right now, but when I really think about it, I can look at it and set a plan.
Right.
And I think that's the important thing for everybody is when we start to think about our money story and then bring what's maybe sitting in the background to consciousness, we can then do something with it and then set a plan to manage it and then build upon that so that we end up in a better position.
Yeah, no, I feel like when I actually started to address my student loan, so it was like literally a year after med school, I just deferred it. I was like, I can't deal with it.
Sure.
I can't even go there. And then the interest like grew exponentially. And then I was fortunate to have a partner that was like, no, you need to like deal with this. Just like you can't avoid it. That's not going to make the problem go away. You got to like create a plan. And that was really scary. And it really took something to be like, okay, create a plan. Then you actually have power. It's scary, but then you have like power over the situation, which I felt like was important.
I'd be interested to know, in the conversations that you've had with people, what do you think are like some of the main sticking points around money, right? Because I think there's a couple different things, and maybe it's just a mix for everybody. But There's some of these ideas that you mentioned before of like, I shouldn't be charging people a certain amount, right? Which is basically like, I don't know, maybe I don't deserve to like make a certain amount because it comes at the cost of someone else. Or there's, this piece of like, oh, I'm not going to look at it because I don't have the tools to like break it down and build out a plan for it. I'd be curious if there are like other routes or things that you've commonly like seen or heard that tend to trip people up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're talking about money because it's also about people's psychological thinking, right? Mm-hmm. There's a value system that we attach to. I mean, money in and of themselves has a value system, but we actually attach a personal value to ourselves in that money. If I don't believe that I am good enough, right, I may not be able to believe that I can charge X amount of dollars for my service, right? This is where we come up with sort of the imposter syndrome, right? So there's that part. I also hear from people, I didn't learn about money, right? So there's this sort of educational barrier that got in the way of them even understanding what the value of just even a dollar is, right? So that sort of gets in the way. And then from that, we can then create a space of shame, right? I don't understand. I can't comprehend this. Alice was saying about, interest, right? We don't teach people enough about, by the way, I'm not a financial advisor. These are just based on my experience. So I'm going to caveat that. But we don't teach people about understanding what compound interest does, right? And then as that interest builds and that number builds, we start to feel bad. And when we start to feel bad, right, we end up in a place of, again, guilt and shame, and that becomes detrimental to our well-being. So when we can sort of tackle these stories, I think we start to do something different, right? That's that transformation. And what I see with people when I'm sitting even in my office with them, even talking with them about, say, session fees, when I say I charge X, they will say, well, that seems really high. Well, how do you value yourself? This is how I value my work and myself. But are you willing to put that investment in? And that's a place we don't even talk about, right? This is, therapy in particular is an investment in oneself.
Right.
And sometimes people can't even see that because, again, there's a value system that they have for themselves.
Yeah, no, I agree. I feel like this idea that our self-worth is so connected to money. If you don't have the money, then you're not worthy in society to some degree, or have a buttload of money means like you've made it and you're successful, and that supposedly makes you better than other people, which in reality it doesn't. It's just a value that we place on money.
Well, and that leads me to a thought as you were saying that, which money is a tool.
Yeah, it is.
We have to learn how to use that tool. And it's a hammer. We don't put a screw in something with a hammer. I mean, we might try, but it's probably going to be a little ineffective. We use a hammer and a nail because it's very specific. Money is just that. It's a means to do certain things that we might want to do and, achieve certain goals, that kind of stuff. But I also think that we don't always get clear on what that means, right? So if we don't know where we're sort of headed with it, how do we even use that tool? We have to teach people to use that tool. Again, I'm not a financial expert. What I'm looking at is the psychological piece of it. When people don't know how to use that tool, well, that can be scary. It can be uncomfortable. So what we can do is we can help people find the resources and the educational pieces to help them understand it so that they can then build something for themselves.
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting thread to kind of pull out there, which is like a lot of people, it seems like, kind of have this implicit social judgment around how much money is made without actually attaching it to quality of life. So it's like, this person makes 150K and this person makes 50K. So this person that makes 150K must have a better life for some reason. But then when you actually like delve into the details and what they're doing and what they enjoy and whatnot, like you were saying, it's a tool. It's a signifier of value to be used for other things, like to spend on things that bring you value. And I just feel like a lot of people get caught up in the number and having the number itself be some sort of meaning or some sort of purpose, when without actually using it or having a reason to use it or something that it connects to, it doesn't actually impact your quality of life. Like I've definitely met people making much more than other people, spending their money in ways that brings them no value whatsoever, and they're miserable compared to someone making half or a quarter as much. So it's really interesting to me just like how ingrained that idea is, because I think there's so many people that are like, I just have to grind, get to the next level, unlock more income, make more, get promoted, start another business, grow it, et cetera, without ever realizing or paying attention to, hey, what am I using this money for? How much do I actually need to build a life that I really like?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in my practice, I see people from all different walks of life. And, I see, people who are making, large sums of money, right? Probably more than I will ever see in my lifetime. But they're still there because there's some challenges that they face around, I don't feel content. This doesn't feel good. I feel lonely. I'm isolated, right? I see people on the other end who also might be feeling the same things, and they make way less, right? They're a struggling 21-year-old college student who's just trying to get by. And what we sort of do is try to uncover, the things behind that. Well, you don't have enough maybe over here. You might have too much, but what really is enough for you in your life? And how do you sort of see that? And then what's your plan? What is your movement forward so that it aligns with who you really are, right? And obviously these things can be subjective to age and that kind of stuff. Where I'm at in my life, I don't need to grind anymore. I've also learned that I don't really want to grind anymore, right? I spent from the time I was 10 years old, starting with 2 different jobs, delivering newspapers in New England in the cold. I know it sounds like one of those, I walked uphill,
In the snow, both ways.
But then I mowed lawns and things like that as a kid. And then, I worked as a dishwasher and all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I started that when I was 10. We're now 30 years later, and I don't really want to have 5 or 6 jobs. But by the way, if I had to do it again, I would probably still do it, But what I've done is I've learned to use money as a tool, right? So that I've now have financial stability so that I don't have to do those things, right? And then again, sort of deciding how much is enough.
Right. Yeah. I feel like people tend to get caught up and attached to a certain number and it's like, only when I hit that number will I be happy. And so they're always in this chasing mode, but even if they achieve that number, then they're like, well, now I got to get it to the next level, then I'll be happy. And it's always in this chasing mode and not actually being present on what's improving their quality of life and what's making them happy in the now.
I mean, what's the expression? More money, more problems, or something? Like
exactly, right?
I think that sometimes, the more we have, without examining that, it can cause some difficulties.
Right.
Again, I'll caveat that with, I understand that there are people who significantly do not have enough in this world, and I want to elevate them too, right? Because we can help them figure out their storyline and then help them find ways to navigate a very complex financial system that we have in this world so that they can find their way out of, say, poverty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I realize one of the things that held me back with my money stories of not having enough and being so conservative about it was that I was scared to spend and invest in my businesses. Especially early on, I was like, oh, I can't afford a business coach. I don't have the money for it. When in hindsight, now that I've experienced a lot of coaching, it would have propelled me to make more money sooner than taking the super slow route that I took for my first initial businesses. And it really took like the 3rd or 4th business for me to get like, oh no, I need to invest sometimes. And sometimes that is a lot, but if I'm making more sooner, then that's a worthwhile investment. It's a matter of looking at it from like, not how much money I have in my bank account, but like, how far is this going to really take me? Is that like, if I'm going to get double my return back within a few months, then that might be worth it, or even triple, or even 20 times back. But if I'm always caught up in the, like, I don't have that money and then I never have that money, then it's not going to progress me forward, accelerating my business.
Yeah, what stands out actually is I love metaphors, by the way. I heard this thing once and it was like the hardest piece of equipment at the gym is the door. And
It is, yes.
and this is what we're talking about, right? It's being able to open that door to say, this is what is here. I think people feel that way sometimes about therapy. And I see about 95% men in particular, they don't want to open the door, right? Because it feels like a weakness, or they don't want to talk about feelings. Well,
Yeah.
I hear that, but we're talking about an investment in oneself, right? If we can open that door and get through it, we can build upon that, right? When we go to the gym, we don't just start off, lifting heavy weights. We build up to it. Our bank accounts develop that way too, right? Again, we're talking about how do we use it as a tool? We start to develop this understanding of, well, what is compound interest, right? We start to understand, what does this savings account mean for me? How much do I need in that? Then we can start to think about our future and say, well, where do I need to end up 20 years from now? But we have to even start to put that on the table for some people, because some people can't even see that future rate, more than just like a couple feet in front of them. So we have to start to open that door and help people through that door.
I think that's an interesting analogy too with exercise. Like if I think about the parallels between exercise and like finances, I would never go into the gym with no information and just start like using machines. And you've probably seen people at the gym like that, doing something like really, really strange way that like not sure what's going on. But if I compare those two things, like going into the gym and having no idea what's going on and living my financial life the same way, like I would never want to walk that path. I would never want to just like be blind and be like, oh, I guess some money goes over here. I guess I lift this way, or like just kind of, I don't know. I guess like you would never learn unless you actually took out the time to get a foundation and then invest some of the time in doing things in a way that's going to be most resonant with you.
I don't do a lot of smoking cessation work anymore, but when I was doing some of that with different folks in a community mental health clinic, one of the things that we started to do with them was help them understand, well, if you're trying to quit smoking, this is detrimental to your health. What does that mean for your lungs and all this other stuff? We know the data on that, right? It's been there forever. But what we started to do was help them understand, well, every time you buy a pack of cigarettes, it costs you X amount of dollars. If you smoke one pack a day, at the end of this month, this is like $300. And you're sitting here and you're telling me that you are struggling to sometimes have food and things like that. Well, guess what? Here's your motivation potentially, right? And some people couldn't even see that. Nobody had ever sort of sat down and broke it down with them to say, here's the challenge. You're smoking these cigarettes. It's not doing you any good physically. I recognize that it's impacting your nicotine receptors in your head. There's an addiction here. But if you're also talking to me about money and you're struggling with some of that, here's where we can find some of that. What do you think? And we open the door to that.
Yeah, that's a really great reframe. It kind of reminded me of, my reframe around the gym and actually investing in like a CrossFit gym versus just like a standard gym for like, yeah, I could pay 30 or 40 bucks for just a gym and then do my own thing whenever I want, but then I would never go. But then but like 130 to 150 for a CrossFit gym a monthly seemed like a lot of money. But when I broke it down of like, okay, I actually spend, on weekends, like I'm going out for drinks and dinner, that could be 30 to 50 bucks each time you go out like once every weekend. That's like 200 bucks right there in itself. And I'm like, I could just minimize that a little and have a better energy and quality and health. And if I invested in it, and I go consistently and I have a coach, and it makes a world of difference because there's accountability and there's structure, and I go and I'm motivated to go. And if I don't show up, then people know that I'm not there, versus the other thing. So I think it does involve a lot of this mindset shifting for people and being like, where is your money going? And is that like improving your quality of life, really?
Yeah, you said something in there about money mindset, right? And I think it's really important that folks in the world start to think about not only their money mindset, but their sort of lifestyle mindset, right? And then trying to bring these things into what I would consider alignment, right? So it's trying to understand, well, what do I need and want out of life, right? We're talking about the gym even. I no longer pay for a gym because I'm the opposite. I wasn't using the gym, right? For me to go to the gym was like this, I was like, I gotta get dressed and then I gotta get there. And what I realized was there was all these sort of psychological barriers that I had to just showing up at the gym. Right. Now I run because there's not a lot of excuses that I can make except for, well, my shoes are at the door and I guess I don't want to put them on, right? But it was uncomfortable when I started doing that. You know, I'm not a runner by nature, and you know, it took me a long time to build up to that. You know, and there was a history of that. As a kid, I had asthma, you know, so what does running actually mean? And what does that feel like? It's uncomfortable. You know, so what I started to realize though, as I'm saying this stuff is we get to, again, think about our lives and hopefully help people see their futures and what that looks like. And then we start to design different parts of it, right? And we get to think about, during that design phase, what do we need and want, right? Do I want to continue to go out to dinner? That's fine. You know, well, I'm going to allocate X amount of dollars to that. Right. But if you're also struggling to potentially pay some other bills, maybe we have to hold that off for the time being, right? Let's help build up a savings account to some degree. So then down the road, you can worry a little less and then do the things that you want. So we have to just think about this stuff. And I think it's a struggle for most people. We're living in a lot of times the day to day, you know, because we're just trying to get by sometimes.
So on that same sort of note, let's say hypothetically, I come to you and I say, Courtland, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm not really paying attention to my money. It's giving me like a bunch of grief. What's like one or two of the first things that you would say like I should look at, or maybe some exercises or something? Like what are the first steps here?
Well, so again, I'm not a financial planner or advisor, right? But what you just said to me was, it's giving me some grief. And I would probably say something to the effect of, tell me about the grief. What's the stress? What's the struggle? What do you feel about this? And then we're going to dive into that story and try to understand what that's about, right? And then as you were sort of telling me about that story and we're understanding it from a psychological perspective, we're going to then think about, well, what can you do, right, to help you propel yourself forward in a way that feels right for you? Well, let's start thinking about your life. Well, tell me where you spend your money. Where do you spend your time? Again, smoking cessation. Are you buying cigarettes? You know, if you're struggling to put gas in your car, but there's this, you know, buying beer every week because you're feeling grief and stress and you're trying to regulate that stress with maybe a sedative factor, alcohol, right? What can we do with that? So there's that sort of piece. And then one of the goals I always have with people in my practice in particular is, let's nudge you to find some resources for yourself, right? There's a book that I recommend to people. It's called I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi. And, you know, he was a Stanford guy. But basically it's the basics of money, you know, and he's talking about, how do you have savings accounts? How do you understand if you can put money in a 401k, what does that mean? You know, and if you can do that, then you get to maybe spend some money on the things that you want. But we have to start somewhere, right? And I think this goes back to our original sort of start of the conversation, which is we have to start the conversation. And then we have to get underneath it. You said it. This gives me grief. Well, what's that about? Right? And then when we start to do that, we start to peel back the layers to open that door, because we have to peel back some layers before we can open the door and then get you through it to then work to the next steps.
So I like that. Correct me if I'm missing any parts here, but it sounds like, you know, there's this piece of kind of understanding the feelings and the mindsets around it. And then there's this other piece of having actual technical skills, I guess is what I'll call them, or just the baseline financial knowledge. And it's like some combination of that is what puts you on the right path.
Yeah, I think that you just summed that up nicely. You know,
cool.
I was going to say, we have to sort of know where we've been and understand that to know where we're going. And even in that knowing where we're going, we then get to design that. I think that there's a lot of folks in this world who believe that they don't have power control. Yeah, we can't control, the environment of the, storms and that kind of stuff.
Right.
But I do think we have some say in deciding how we build our lives. And that's, I get it. We're in a system that doesn't always help us do that. It pushes against us most of the time. It doesn't want us always to succeed, that kind of stuff. But I think we do have some autonomy and some control inside of that. So we learn those tools, right? We learn how to use what's here in front of us to build something.
So that actually segues into what I was going to ask about, which is, we've been talking about a lot of the like individual psychological factors. And I feel like, we mentioned earlier, for a lot of people, they don't talk about money. It's hard to talk about money. Why do you think that people have such a struggle? Or like, why do you think it's so socially ingrained to not talk about money?
And this is an opinion. I think people feel a lot of shame around it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we have not talked about, in our families even, the raw numbers, right? When, Alice was saying in regards to her family, right? There's a storyline there. I'm imagining, Donovan, you have a storyline. In my family, it was, well, we're always going to have nothing. And that was the thing, but nobody ever asked the question, well, why are we always going to have nothing?
Mm-hmm.
Can we do something different here? And so I think that is if we want to think about intergenerational things, we can watch that cycle. A lot of our great grandparents, right, from the Great Depression, right, stocking freezers because they were afraid they weren't going to have any food. Well, what does that mean? And then we have to unravel these things to try to understand this further so that we can say, what's enough? What works for us?
Mm.
So it sounds like on the one end, there's this like potential shame or like feeling of not having enough. I'd be curious if you have any like theories or ideas on what's going on the other end, because it seems like in general, even if people are doing well, they still don't really talk about money very often.
Yeah, I saw this thing from Gary Vaynerchuk this morning, which I'm sure anybody listening probably knows. But he said basically flashiness does not equal happiness.
Mm.
And I think that we live in a world of marketing and pushing a narrative, right? Having the bigger TV, the nicer car,
Right.
Leads us down a pathway to feeling good, right? Which it does for a moment or two.
Yeah.
But again, I'm seeing people from all different walks of life come in and say, I'm just not feeling so good. Mm-hmm. So we then have to understand on both sides of that, what does that mean, right? And what that tells me, at least how I sort of see it, is that people are fundamentally misaligned with themselves, right? They tend to be in a job that pays well, but it doesn't speak to their being and their soul.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're in a job that pays nothing, and that doesn't speak to their soul.
Mm-hmm.
Or they go to school, right, and rack up student loan debt for a career trajectory that might not actually be what they love.
Yeah.
Right. And then we fundamentally sort of get off the path. If we're driving our car and it's out of alignment, it veers off the road. So when we start to dive into sort of that, we'll say money mindset, lifestyle design mindset, we can then actually bring ourselves back into alignment.
Mm.
And then go, oh, I'm actually content. Because I think happiness it's a feeling and it can be very elusive. So we have to sort of work towards contentment. Well, I have enough. Here I am.
Yeah. Well, Courtland, it's been incredibly valuable, the insight that you've been offering here with us and our audience today. Was there anything else you'd like to share today before we wrap up?
I mean, for anybody listening, I think it's just to ask yourself what your money story is. Ask yourself what your life story is, right? Mm-hmm. And, I always encourage people to seek support and resources and educational tools that help improve themselves. And, if somebody is really struggling, emotionally and feeling like they're depressed or sad or these things are getting in the way, I really believe that therapy can be really valuable for people, because what you're going to do is you're going to start to peel back those layers and get to something deeper, and that hopefully leads you down a path that feels right for yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for being our guest. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you both so much. I'm glad that I got to chat with you both.
Yeah, wonderful. And thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time.
You can check out more content at howtohappy.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you can stay up to date on the videos. We've also got a Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook that you can check out. See you next time.